Hello, everyone. I'm James Milan. Welcome to a new month, a new week, and a new DPCD update. I am here with Jennifer Raitt, the director of our Department of Planning and Community Development here in town. And we get to talk to you, Jenny, every couple of weeks, and happy to do so, obviously, and glad you're here. Hope you
Thank
had a
you.
good weekend.
Thank you. I did. How about you?
Very good. Very good.
Excellent.
And I'm really ready, like just starting to feel hopeful in a number of ways, I got to say. And the weather is no small part of it. Yay for New England and seasons, at least when things start heading in the right direction.
Spring is a
Um,
great season.
it is a great season. It is also soon to be town meeting season. And that makes your already busy job even busier. I would like to spend today, if you don't mind, just talking about articles under the general category of zoning based articles. And without delving in too deeply to any of the individual articles, rather have you take us survey for us a little bit under broad categories like, commercial development in town and housing and the environment, et cetera, and just kind of give us a general guide to what is on the agenda, and also what stage we are at, because I speak to you on March 1st. Town meeting itself will not start for another number of weeks, and I know there are lots of meetings and deliberations to be had between now and then. So with taking all that into account, let me ask you to start. Let's just start with commercial development as a topic area.
Sure. Well, thank you, James. So there are three sort of broad topical areas that I'll talk with you about. The first one, I think, under commercial development makes some sense, though I have to say that there's the least amount of articles related to this one, as well as a second one about environment. Third one, which is quite heavy, which is around housing.
Hmm.
So on the first item with regard to commercial development, there's two zoning warrant articles that are, or three zoning warrant articles that are being heard this evening as part of the public hearing process for zoning warrant articles through the Arlington Redevelopment Board. And they'll have a public hearing tonight, but the hearing will be continued basically through April 5th, when the board will deliberate and then make votes on the recommended actions to town meeting. So there's still time if you can't attend the meeting tonight, and this video is likely to be posted after the fact. You can always view the videos as part of ACMi, or feel free to submit comments to the redevelopment board about any of the warrant articles that are happening in progress. With regard to tonight, we're talking about two warrant articles that actually came to the 2020 annual town meeting, and then were essentially deferred and continued to this town meeting because of the nature of not getting through the entire warrant last
Yeah,
year.
that's the story with a number of articles, right?
That's basically half of the story for most of these articles. So these two are in that boat. One of them is about putting a definition for mixed use, which actually does have a definition, but the petitioner is seeking further clarity on the definition. And this actually did have a hearing it was our only night of hearings last March. So the board has heard this one before, and we'll hear it again this evening. And then the second one is also one that we heard last March, which is about converting commercial uses to residential uses. And the petitioner is seeking to make it clear that the only residential would be to affordable housing, but not any other type of residential use. So that's also happening this evening. Both of these are essentially in relationship to mixed use development. And so for those viewers who might not know a lot about it, mixed use is a use in the zoning bylaw that was adopted in 2016 at the annual town meeting. And since that time, we've had a number of developments come forward through the board and be permitted under the mixed use zoning construct, which is relevant to our primarily to our business districts,
Mhm.
but also in the industrial zone, though we haven't had any permits for the industrial zone at this point in time. So it's really just limited to the primary corridors in town, like Massachusetts Avenue and Broadway,
Mhm.
although there are other locations where there are business districts as well, particularly the smaller ones. So these two articles really relate to the mixed use zoning bylaw. And then also, I talked about last week the industrial zoning, so I won't dive too deeply into that one, but that definitely relates to new commercial development and the possibilities for new commercial development in our industrial zones, which is really zoning that is right along the Millbrook corridor in town, as well as the Minuteman Bikeway. They both are sort of parallel, and a couple of other zones as well. So not a very large zoning district overall, but potentially some interesting future uses that could come out of that zoning if it's passed. And then there's marijuana delivery, which is currently we do allow retail marijuana, medical treatment centers, medical marijuana, and other types of uses. This is adding a use category just for delivery,
Mhm.
which is now allowed in Massachusetts. So we want to amend our bylaw to also allow that use and permit it within the same zoning districts that where those marijuana uses are currently allowed.
Mhm.
Um, the other two are related to parking, but also I do feel relate to potentially the impact on commercial development. One is related to parking minimums. This is sort of an expansion of what the redevelopment board uh, was able to get adopted last special town meeting by making it become all of the business districts. And so the petitioner is still working on the details of that article and will be coming to us at a future hearing date. For any of these hearings, they're all posted to the town's website. All of the information is available on the redevelopment board's page right now. And if you're interested in joining any of these hearings in the future, there is one on tonight, March 1st, March 15th, March 29th, and then April 5th. Another one is related to parking for people with a handicap placard, and making it a little bit more clear in the zoning bylaw about the need to incorporate more handicap accessible parking. So that'll also be a future warrant article hearing. And then we have this is actually not a zoning bylaw change, but this is something that is proposed as sort of a competition. So the department engaged in a process with an MIT graduate design studio to study the Broadway corridor. And
Mhm.
we worked with them, and they issued a report at the end of 2019, actually. Um, because of the way that the year went last year, we didn't act upon much of it.
Right.
So this
Mhm.
petitioner is seeking basically a design competition and the endorsement by town meeting to move forward with a design competition to encourage mixed use development along the Broadway corridor. And I feel that that also clearly touches upon commercial development
Right.
potential.
Yeah, so, oof, I
Yeah,
mean,
so
we
that's
said
just
we
that.
were we said we were gonna just, do quick hits here, but I mean, really I asked you, in discussing what we should talk about today before we went on camera, hot button issues was the kind of shorthand for what I was looking for. And certainly in terms of commercial development, the things that you've touched on also include some affordable housing. A lot of people have a lot of concerns about that mixed use development along Mass Ave specifically, and also Broadway. And as you mentioned, there are other corridors as well. All of this taps into, people's general awareness of the fact that it is such a proportionally large, uh, 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 our revenues are so disproportionately residential that we all want to do something about that, all of us homeowners here in Arlington. And yet, people have great concerns over how we do that, how we manage this. So clearly, many of the articles you just mentioned address issues that have been swirling in town. and in public conversation in town for quite some time, and are getting pushed forward gradually under this kind of very wonderful and also occasionally unwieldy town meeting system that we are all yoked to. All right, enough editorializing from James. Let me ask you about whatever environmental or whatever warrant proposals touch on environmental issues.
Sure. So the main proposals are really one that we also spoke about the previous session that we had, which was about energy efficient homes on non-conforming lots. And that is about the issue of being able to basically rebuild a new home and make it energy efficient on a new energy efficient foundation. And so the petition came out of the net zero action planning process and many discussions in the Clean Energy Future Committee.
Mhm.
So that is what I talked about that last time, so I won't go too much further. The second one is our stormwater bylaw, which is about really in need of an update to comply with what is considered an environmental permitting process that we need to comply with in order to comply with our stormwater emissions. We have to basically amend not only the stormwater bylaw, but make amendments to the zoning bylaw and the town bylaw as well. So a number of steps in that process, and that's being led by our department as well as the engineering division. And so that is actually a town bylaw change, not a zoning change at this time, but we envision that it will lead to zoning bylaw changes as well in the future. And then there are two other articles that are really, designed to be more of an endorsement from town meeting again. One is a climate emergency, declaring a climate emergency rather, and the other one is also about the tree canopy and noting that the tree canopy should be viewed as a public health resource. And I won't go too deeply into either of those because they're also not coming before the redevelopment board. They're at the select board. But I do think that they're, still in the same vein and sort of category of people who are really interested in making changes to our bylaws in an effort to protect our environment and the future, and for future generations to be able to enjoy that environment.
Yeah, and I know that at least as pertains to the first of the two last articles that you mentioned there about declaring a climate emergency, my understanding is that that is just a declaration at this point, but that would enable actions to be taken thereafter, which of course are not on the table at the moment. Is that a correct understanding?
I think that is the intention.
Okay. And you have mentioned before we move on to, we thought we were covering the small topics, right? And now we're going to go into the housing issues. But before we do that, you have mentioned at various points in the conversation today that there are petitioners who stand behind the warrant articles you're discussing. Can you just very, very briefly remind the audience who might these petitioners be and what is the process that they are following right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll say that it comes from a lot of different places. Usually, in the case of most zoning articles, they come from the redevelopment board. They're filed by the redevelopment board, usually because of planning processes that we're engaged in, or edits that we've observed need to happen in order to make the bylaw more usable. Because of our work with the bylaw, we observe that amendments might be needed.
Mhm.
So that's typically what happens with zoning bylaw amendments. That's like the primary way in which zoning gets amended or proposals move forward. But there's also, of course, citizen petitions, which is basically a number of residents can file a warrant article petition rather by the deadline, which was at the end of January. And it's essentially a proposal to put something on the warrant for a town meeting, and you get registered voters to sign off on it. You do not need to be a town meeting member. You can be anybody who is a registered voter in town to sign off on that. And the signatures become verified. And if everything looks good, then it becomes a warrant article. That is also then reviewed by town council, and depending upon whether or not it fits into town bylaw or zoning bylaw is also reviewed by me. And that becomes part of the warrant. So that's another pathway. And a third pathway is actually the select board can amend the zoning bylaw. So there are two articles that are related to issues that came from the Disability Commission. So the Disability Commission via the select board has filed those two zoning articles. But then there's other ways that zoning articles can be filed, including, for example, the Regional Planning Agency can technically file amendments to the zoning bylaw.
Mhm.
But those first three are really the first the ways in which we typically see warrant articles come forward. And
Right.
I'd say that the best of them usually come out of a planning process where there's been a lot of dialogue, a lot of time to kind of process the issues and discuss them before getting to a public hearing, which is not typically the best place to have an in-depth conversation, because especially if there's a number of hearings happening on the same evening, it can be challenging to get all of the information that's needed in order to make a good, sound decision. Whereas during a
Yes.
planning process, you have a little more time to process that.
A really good point, I think, that hopefully people will take away with them, because you're certainly right that much discussion and deliberation needs to happen in order to really hone in on the best language and content for a warrant article. And as we've discussed before, town meeting itself is really meant not for those deliberations, but rather for kind of the procedural voting on those articles. And I know, looking at the calendar for March, that there are a number of nights ACMI at ACMI. We're very aware there are a number of nights of multiple meetings that are scheduled, and maybe more that need to be added. So certainly, your point is a very pertinent one. And thanks also for that explanation. I imagine that at this time, this is always an engaged town, a town full of engaged citizens. Um, but it does feel like more than ever at the moment, people are really wanting to affect change in ways that as they see fit. And so therefore, we're looking at 80, 90 warrant articles here, at least at this stage of the process. And probably many of those are coming from petitioners, as you've mentioned, who are real, who are just citizens of Arlington who are concerned about these issues. All right, sorry, moving on. Housing. Couple of things to
So
say.
yeah, this one. So I mean, this one is sort of a balance between two big bucket issues. The first one is affordable housing. There's a number of warrant articles that are either a town bylaw article or a zoning uh, bylaw amendment that aim to address issues around affordable housing. Some of them came from uh, recommendations out of the housing production plan. Others are ideas that people are putting forward and wish to have an amendment to a bylaw in order to make it happen. So they range from, we talked about the accessory dwelling units.
Mhm.
That's been around the block. The increasing the inclusionary zoning percentage, which is currently at 15%. The petitioner is saying potentially between 25 to 30% of the development should be affordable housing. We also have non-conforming affordable housing on non-conforming lots, so not energy efficient homes, but
Mhm.
affordable housing on non-conforming lots. Um, we have the tear down moratorium, which we talked about previously, and that the petitioner is talking about it in relationship to affordable homes. I do put that also into another category, which is around the issue of preserving single family homes. And there's a lot on the agenda that also relates to that as well. But two more items related to affordable housing include in the town bylaw, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that was passed last year. There were some people who were interested in potentially reserving affordable housing funds that are coming through that trust fund only for people who are making uh, basically a gross household income of 60% of the area median income. So lower than what was established at the last town meeting. So a reserve of affordable housing for 60% area median income. So slightly lower incomes. And then the last
What
one,
was that? What does that compare to? You're saying it's lower than what was passed before. What was that?
the Affordable Housing Trust Fund established that it would be in alignment with the Community Preservation Act, which is technically 100% area median income because that's what is allowed under CPA.
Uh-huh.
CPA for community housing, they can technically fund affordable housing projects that are up to 100% area median income. So that is for a family of four, that would be, certainly over $100,000. So this petition is saying, well, instead of 100%, it should be lower than that, 60%. Um, and so that'll be a conversation. The
Hmm.
other one is an affordable housing overlay study. So creating potentially a committee or some other, or adding to an existing body the work of studying potentially creating an affordable housing overlay district. This is something that the city of Cambridge adopted a year ago, and other communities are investigating it as well. So that's
Can
another
I
one.
ask you, Jenny, what's an overlay? What does that mean, an overlay district?
Sure. An overlay would be basically on top of an existing underlying zoning district. So if you're allowed to develop two-family homes in the R2 zoning district, an affordable housing overlay might say, well, if it's 100% all affordable housing, then you can have 5 units or 6 units or more than that even, on top of what you're allowed to do in
Got
the
it.
underlying zoning district, but only if it's all affordable housing and meeting certain dimensional and density, certain rules essentially.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, and I don't want to interrupt if if you're not quite done, but
There are more,
clearly
but
there are very strong voices and advocates here in town working on expanding the affordable housing possibilities in the town. And it's been a topic, as I said, that I've been aware of as part of public conversation for years. But it does feel like people are more galvanized than ever to actually affect affect real change in that area.
absolutely. Yep. And there are more. So, I mean, there's, on the issue of preserving homes, we have one about rock removal. We have one about establishing a committee on residential development in the R0 through R4 zoning districts. And then we have a side yard sky exposure planes zoning bylaw amendment. Um, and then I mentioned the tear down moratorium already. So a number of articles that I think are somewhere between wanting to preserve things and wanting to, if we do produce anything, it should be affordable housing. And
Yeah,
I would say
and
that to
there's a
your,
certain tension between those things, I assume, right?
there might be. I mean, I think when you look at all of the bylaw amendments, whether it's town or zoning bylaw amendments, you have to look at them together and understand the cumulative impact of
Mhm.
these amendments. And I think some of them are could potentially be in conflict with one another because they're trying to achieve different goals. Um, it's just what are the town's priorities? I think that's what needs to be um, clarified, perhaps.
Right.
And I think that in terms of people's interest in these areas, yes, they are very much reflective of, not only conversations in Arlington, but definitely conversations that are well beyond Arlington, which includes issues around climate, issues around affordability and availability of housing, issues around our business districts, and sort of the post-pandemic landscape that we all are wondering what that will look like.
Well stated. Absolutely. um, okay, so that is the kind of affordable and also preservation aspect of housing. Is there more to talk about? Or
So that was it.
okay, what do you know?
And
So
that's
yeah.
all that I have. But I mean, there may be others that I've missed. I don't want to, it's the warrant is posted online on the town meeting page at this point in time. So it's able, to be viewed, and people can see many of the other warrant articles that are posted that are, potentially related to any one of these topics. I've just given you a selection today of those that I think are, of interest, and certainly in those sort of buckets that I talked about.
Yeah, and as you've said, people can spend most of the next month to 6 weeks steeping themselves in these issues even further, following government meeting, town body meetings that are covered by ACMi, of course, throughout the week, and then also on the town's website, just kind of following under the different committees what is going on and pushing forward. Because, as I think you've already made clear, but bears reiterating before we go, we are still early in the process of kind of zeroing in on everything that will actually be presented at town meeting. And
Yes.
much of this is still to be determined from public hearings and other kinds of meetings in the next month or more.
That's right. And if people are curious about the redevelopment board's warrant article process, we also have on our page, right below the posting related to the public hearings, sort of a process timeline that illustrates sort of when and how to go about filing articles, and how the board evaluates them, and what happens at different stages in the process. We felt that it actually came from a resident encouraging the board to more clearly communicate our process, but also make it a little bit easier for people who are passionate about certain issues, but don't necessarily know how to engage in the process.
I think one of my favorite things about this town, people will not be surprised, I think I've said it before, is that there does just feel like there's a real commitment on your guys' end. By that, I mean town hall's end, to be
Mhm.
responsive to those kinds of requests and needs among the citizenry, because uh, residents are engaged, but they may not have ever done anything like this before. So figuring out how to make it easiest for us to do so, and also how to make it easiest for us to understand how you do what you're doing, is again something that feels good for me as a longtime resident of the town, and that I am just feel is a bedrock of the trust that many of us have in those of you who are looking after our collective interests. So appreciate it. This is another example of that. Obviously, these conversations, and we look forward to continuing this over the rest of this month and on from there. And again, we appreciate it and wish you the best as you embark on, as we've said, you got a busy job. It's about to get busier for the next 6-8 weeks or so. That's for sure.
Well, thank you. And we'll talk more about other warrant articles again when we see each other in a couple of weeks. I'm always available to any resident who might have a question about the process, or about an article, or if they have ideas for the future. Please reach out.
Absolutely. I have been speaking with Jennifer Raitt, the director of our Department of Planning and Community Development here in town. This is the DPCD update. It is the 1st of March. Happy March, everybody. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Jenny, thanks for joining us. And thank you out there. We'll see you next time.